It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about the second and third book in the series that began with The Outside by Ada Hoffman, The Fallen, and The Infinite.
The Infinite.
Yes. So I don't know if we need to bother with the plot, given that these are sequels.
I think we can basically just say that this continues the story of The Outside. And yeah, move on. There are still wizards and there are still lesbians.
That there are. The same wizards and lesbians from before are still around.
Plus a couple new ones.
Yes, indeed. So why should you read these books?
Well, for one thing, if you want to know what happens after the first book.
This is true.
I personally thought that the third book was better than the second.
Yes. I think so. So this trilogy, it turns out, kind of, in my opinion, runs the gamut of the Wizards versus Lesbians books, in that one book in the trilogy is genuinely good. One of them is
kind of meh,
and one of them it almost goes into glorious mess territory.
I absolutely agree. It fails, but in some interesting ways, and we should at least applaud its attempts.
Exactly. So I would suggest, I think that also this may be a case where you can actually skip the second book. Like, I was thinking about it, and so little happens in the second book that if you're not feeling it, you can just skip to the third one, and you won't really have missed much.
I would read, I mean, part of it's, I feel like you could read like the first couple chapters of the second book and then the last couple chapters of the second book, and you don't really need anything that happens in the middle.
Yes. The second book can certainly be skimmed quite heavily.
It can be skimmed quite heavily, and if you're the sort of reader who can generally fill in the blanks, then you could read the first couple chapters just to get a sense of, who the new players are, basically just to get a sense of what's going on with the other graduate students. And then you can pretty much fill in the rest from context clues from the third book.
Yep, that sounds about right. Why shouldn't you read these books?
Well, the second one's not very good.
And unfortunately.
Unfortunately, and I think the first one actually works quite well as a standalone. And the second and third both do, I think as you said to me, they do the thing where they make the problems of the first book harder to ignore.
Yes, that is true. I think that if you had a really solid experience with the first book and you feel pretty satisfied with what was put down there, I might suggest just not going forward with it, because even though while the third book has some fun stuff and interesting stuff going on in it, it's not going to give you more of the first book, and it may make you like the first book less.
Yeah.
So this might be a case where you might actually have a better time just pretending that these books don't exist and moving on. That's that. I think that's where I am with it.
Content warnings. I mean, it's the same stuff that from the previous book. It's, all sorts of body horror and, domestic violence, torture, ableism, mental illness, graduate school.
I don't think there are any new content warnings from the first book, and I think that most of the worst stuff in fact happens in the first book. So if you were fine with that, you should be fine with these.
Yeah, I suppose if you don't want to read about somebody watching their spouse die because something like that has happened to you recently, then perhaps not read this. Then you should know that the third book contains that.
That is true. That is a good point. That's a relatively harrowing bit of business there. Mm. But at least it's something happening.
It is definitely something happening.
Yes. All right. So with that being said, I'm eager to just move on to discussing
Let's
this
just
thing.
jump into the spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone. And here we are. So, in the words of another great mad scientist, Dr. Doofenshmirtz, if I had a nickel for every time my mentally ill lesbian protagonist had suffered brain damage and become Tentacle Jesus, I'd have
I'd
two
have
nickels.
2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird
But
that
it's
it happened
weird that
twice.
it happened twice. So the parallels to the city in the middle of the night become much stronger in the third book, which is not something that I was expecting to happen.
Or hoping, really, to happen.
No, nor hoping.
Yeah, no, it's a very true.
There's it's a this it gets I don't think this was like tipped in the first book, but it gets very Christian.
Yes,
Very,
it
very
super
Christian.
Does. Like it gets
in a way
really,
that I
it
was
gets
not
super-
expecting.
No, me neither. And like it gets super Christian, and it also does the thing where you flash back to world religions failing, but the only religion that seems to exist on Earth is Christianity.
Yes, the others are sort of mentioned, and like it does things like make sweeping statements like essentially all human religions, have people being punished in hell.
Right,
Which is simply not true. Yes. This book comes from. This is another one of. It turns out that these books are another one that are written from a cultural space of obligate Christianity, and it is definitely reacting against that, and also assuming that it's a global thing rather
Yes.
than a thing that is localized to one particular part and culture of the globe. And it doesn't have Jews in it, also, which is really weird.
Yes.
Given the whole given that a lot of the metaphors that we're talking about here are very you would think that there would be some discussion of the Jewish faith. You're not telling me that we didn't make it out of this religious war. We're very good at hiding. We survived the Inquisition, we survived the Holocaust, we've survived our own best efforts to consign us to the dust. We made it through the pogroms, and now you're telling us that it's a computer program that would be the end of us. Fuck off.
This calls to mind Eric Flint, who's not Jewish, but makes a point of putting Jewish characters in all of his future science fiction, because he looked at all the science fiction around him and went, if you extrapolate based on what I'm reading, all of these futures have Hitler winning.
Yes. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and this is part of what I mean. I mean, again, with not just with the hell thing, but there's the museum of all the vanished religions, and I'm sorry to say, it does not matter how many signs and portents you put in the world, you're not going to win over all the Jews.
Yep, no, this is 100% the case. Yeah, and so there are a few disappointing things about these two books.
Starting with the fact that it gets weirdly super Christian.
Not just super Christian, but specifically Madoka Christian. Our hero, not only is Yoshiro Chen become Jesus, dies for our sins, and is reborn as Tentacle God. It's Yoshiro, not Yoshiro. Oh, I'm off tonight. My lips are lying and I'm starting to feel annoyed.
Yep.
But it's the sort of thing where it's like, I died, but now I'm everywhere. I'm all around you. My good vibes, very question mark.
Yes.
My good vibes are going to permeate the universe, and I'll be, and I will be the good, superhuman god thing. Despite the fact that the very first thing that she does when she becomes a god is to commit mass murder, like on a horrific scale.
Yes.
Which is not even discussed or dwelled upon.
It falls to her fellow graduate students to go, well, I mean, she did wipe out the entire priesthood / governing caste, but there's still a fair amount of people who are allied with them, just who for one reason or another weren't connected to the network. We're going to have to figure out terms of amnesty, aren't we?
Yeah. But and I'm sure they're going to be happy to come back into the fold once you've murdered all of their friends and superiors, and not just the military supercomputer, but all of the people who became angels because they really wanted to sort of be part of the god of creativity or the god of love. All those people dead.
Also, other people like Enga, even just wiping out the horrible mass murderer god, like you get the people like Enga who were basically
it seemed like a lot of them were coerced into,
were
working
coerced.
for her, right?
I will say, actually, that is a reason to read the other two books, is you get some good Enga moments in both of them.
Yes, there is more Enga, although there is not as much more Enga as I would have liked, and that is partially because of a set of secondary characters that are introduced but not developed, and yet they get a lot of screen time.
All the grad students?
Yes, who
Yeah.
Kiana and I both read all of these books, and Kiana referred to them variously as the Disability Planeteers and the Mental Illness Power Rangers. The first book felt like good. The first book felt like good representation, and the second and third books do not feel like good representation.
They do not. With the exception of, I do think that actually Tiv in books, especially in book 2, is a really good depiction of that one neurotypical in the friend group.
Yes, no, I agree with that, and also I like the fact that that Tiv can sort of grow to understand what being part of the neurodivergent group is like just by being traumatized and stressed to the point where her brain also kind of stops working right, and she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, this is a familiar feeling from those around me." That I liked, I liked the fact that Tiv is the only Tiv carefully thinks about everybody around her in terms of mental illness. Where every other point of view character says neurodivergence. And which I think is, and this is all, the way that she's speaking inside her head, which, tells you something about her. And even though she's extremely sweet and has the best of intentions,
she totally has a weird caretaker complex. I mean,
yes.
You know that from the beginning where her, she's trying to convince Akavi to put her back in touch with Yashira. And she's, with Ysera, because she needs me. So it's, and basically the fact that she gets a little bit exasperated occasionally being the low neurotypical actually made me like her more.
Yes, indeed. She does get the arc of the second book might have been her getting over that, but the second book never really comes into focus enough.
It really doesn't.
I can sort of give you my pitch for why the second book might make a kind of sense.
Okay.
This is going out of the limb of the it's boring on purpose limb, which is never a good limb that you want to be on when you're discussing literature. But it's like, okay, so in the first book of the series we're setting up the terms, right? This is the evil power, the empire. Here's revolution. Here are the problems with revolution and the costs of revolution. Here is the revolutionary leader who doesn't care whether she kills a bunch of people. And here is us caught in the middle and trying to, make do. The second book is actually, in a kind of Madoka way, a sort of, here's a granular, grinding portrait of how frustrating and boring and stressful trying to run the New Republic is, particularly if you're being run by a bunch of college students without a single liberal arts major among them.
They're not college students. They were PhDs.
They're great. They're PhD students. Yeah.
Yes, a bunch of physics PhDs.
Student radicals in this. Yes. They certainly feel like the student radicals as opposed to the people trying to help and mostly failing to help.
Yes.
And then, the big revolutionary moment at the end of the second book is incrementalism. The gone people get together and make the world slightly better in an imperceptible way.
You do get to see what it's like on the ground for individuals, because you get to see Chill, the 20-something who's just her
Yeah.
Huang
is her surname.
Yeah, who, and I like that it's actually kept ambiguous whether, she actually has superpower charisma or if she's just like got a reasonably forceful personality. And
Yes.
Nobody's
everybody
expecting
around
from a
her assumes
20-something
that she
woman.
has superpower charisma, but yeah, she might just be a leader.
Yeah.
Those exist.
She might just be, a young woman who's rising to the occasion.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think it is supposed to show the costs and grind of revolution. But the problem is that the book is too interested still in, the shiny special people.
Yes. Without bothering to give them more than one character trait per person, mind you.
Right.
But yes, it is still far too interested in that. And also the whole, actually another thing that I was not pleased about from The City in the Middle of the Night Comes Back, which is a kind of romanticism about the noble savage, which is kind of what the Gone people are.
Yes, which is absolutely what the Gone people are.
Yeah, no, they're basically, the native people are in tune with nature, and they're doing their, we're improving the corn, basically.
And they're doing their weird, scary blood rituals, and
yeah, which is about, making making forest farming and mushroom, gathering more possible over, years of generations of careful work. And it's sort of this, very romantic but weirdly condescending and dehumanizing portrait of people who, live indigenous lifestyles.
yeah, no, I think that's a totally valid criticism.
Yeah. But then we're like, okay, so this is, this may be a little bit more realistic feeling, but it's not going to end our science fiction trilogy. So instead,
right.
The third book is kind of like, well, what does an actual revolution look like? And it turns out what it looks like is the second coming of Christ and the immediate destruction of all sinners and the dissolution of their souls.
Yes.
Speaking of which, I also want to talk about souls.
Let's talk about souls, because this is in a place where souls have been scientifically proven to exist, and yet this doesn't appear to have any real impact on world religions, by which we mean evangelical Christianity.
Yes, that is a real weird one. But more to the point, this book kind of, in the first book we were like, okay, the gods eat people's souls after their death, and I had it. The first book doesn't really go into detail about that, and I thought, well, maybe this is a lie that the gods are telling, or blah 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 blah. There's a bunch of different explanations for why people think this, but in the second and third book, we get the confirmation. No, it's real. The soul exists. It's scientific. Its executive function is what the soul is, because
And personality.
Yes. When Ysera, her soul gets broken, she gets bad ADD, which the author seems to think is DID, but isn't.
I mean, I think she's supposed to have DID.
Yes, I will say I don't know anybody with DID. I know many people with ADD.
Well, I mean, at least not the form of DID that involves actual separate personalities, as opposed to just dissociating a lot.
Which also she doesn't have.
Right.
She has a condition where she is aware of a bunch of different voices in her head arguing, which I would argue is just the human condition.
There is that, yes.
I was not convinced that there was anything wrong with her that isn't wrong with everybody. And
except that she has really bad ADD.
Right. She suddenly has really bad ADD. And it's like, and weirdly, this book, which mentions a lot of other diagnoses by name, ADD is never brought up.
It's true.
There's a bunch of weird omissions in here.
Yeah, you have people with PTSD, you have people with depression, you have people with anxiety, you have lots of people with diagnosed autism.
Yep, you have OCD.
And you have OCD, and you have, and Ysera is at least supposed to have DIT. I mean, the acknowledgments mention consulting plural people about their experiences to make Ysera better informed. But
Indeed, and I'm not arguing with any of those experiences because that is a particularly fraught area of the discourse.
yes,
Just like, regardless of what input the author got, I think what the author produced was a portrait of somebody with ADD and depression.
and really bad
and-
PTSD.
And really bad PTSD, exactly. And of course, all of these terms are, inefficient catch-alls that we...
Right. Well, and see, this is another thing where it was fine that, she's diagnosed autistic in the first book, partly because, the first book exists in this sort of future so far that it might as well be, fantasy. But when you start flashing back to near future, it starts to raise questions like, really? We're still using the diagnosis of autism? Like, that hasn't evolved or changed in these thousands of years?
Yes.
Like, autism is a diagnosis, and how we refer to it and how we describe it and what it describes has changed drastically over my lifetime.
Very much so. Like, it's the way that it was thought of when I was a kid and the way that it's thought of now are almost indistinguishable, or seem almost like they're describing two different phenomena.
Yes.
And yeah, no, I mean, there's this sort of the idea that culture was halted and ossified when the gods took over, right?
Yeah. And like
which
that
might
I
explain
can
it.
Yeah, though obviously it hasn't completely, because like the different planets have different cultures, and it's not like Riain was the one that happened to be settled by all the people who had good disability politics.
Exactly. Humanity, despite being hampered by the limitations that the gods put on it, has changed and progressed over the course of 700 years, as you would expect it to.
Yes. Plus, there's all the like virtue names. Like again, this is coming out of clearly that is another cultural progression.
Yes, albeit yet another Christian-derived one.
Absolutely, yes. Tiv is productivity.
Yes.
So it's funny. It's Christian, except that it's very much like this, like the virtues of this millennia. It's like productivity and what is ship? Is ship what? Relationship, companionship, friendship, something like that.
I forget. There are some funny ones that are like almost, that's actually one of the things I like, is that it has there are a bunch of them that are tossed off that are kind of like, amusingly incongruous.
Yes.
But I forget what ship is short for. Yes. Although it would be funny if it were relationship, because that's her job in the novel, is to be the one who is in a relationship with productivity.
Yes.
It's short for citizenship, which is significantly less funny.
All right. Well, so sort of spiraling back out again, rewinding is so it's really weird that their notions of disability and even the terminology they use haven't changed at all. Haven't even changed between our present and the near future. And it's also very weird to have souls made, scientifically proven, and as you pointed out, souls as executive function, because the way that Ysera is able to become tentacle autism Jesus is because she has such a lack of executive function that she can infiltrate Nemesis. She can let her soul get eaten by Nemesis and infect Nemesis with her own lack of executive function.
Right. She can divide by zero the evil computer by
just being
making
that
it try
disabled.
to divide by her. Exactly. She is so disabled that she disables the evil supercomputer.
Which I wouldn't actually mind as a sort of disability as a superhero, but it plays into, and maybe this is just because I'm not Christian, but I absolutely hate the, you have to die thing.
Yeah, you have to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. It's a way to end a story, certainly.
It's a way to end a story, but like the thing is that Tiv is right. She shouldn't be. Like,
yeah.
Ev's plan, and if Ev wants to this to happen so badly, she could just sacrifice herself. It's not like she's particularly functional either.
This is true. Although that would end up with Ev being God. And
I'm not saying this would be a better ending, for humanity, but yes. The thing is that this is another Madoka thing, actually, where
it is.
The story wants us to read this as a triumph because she becomes a god, but to me, it reads as a tragedy of somebody who her entire life has basically been told that the only thing worthy about her is her brain. And, that, and both that she is, irrevocably broken in her brain, but also that her brain is the only worthy thing about her. And it ends with her basically being told, with the narrative proving that that is true. That the thing that makes her worthy as a human is her ability to, to sacrifice herself by her, the virtue of having a unique brain.
Right. Like her sort of personal tragedy is that she has been groomed from an early age to be the special one for humanity, and like none of her story is about her like rejecting or questioning that.
Yes, there's a moment where, Ev is being extremely creepy, as Ev tends to be, and being like, has anybody told you how rare and beautiful you are? And instead of thinking, this is creepy, or even, yes, actually, Tiv has, she thinks, oh, well, the last person who told me I was beautiful is Tiv. And at least Tiv, didn't say that, at least Tiv said that after I'd just done something important.
Yeah, no, she never gets past my worth is, a product of how productive I am.
Which is entirely an accurate reflection of what it is like to get through graduate school and never, if you don't get deprogrammed afterwards. But again, it doesn't.
Or what it's like to be a gifted child.
But yeah. I gotta say, having been both, graduate school exists basically to force your brain into that mold, no matter what you've managed to do with the rest of your life. Wow.
And I'm gonna go ahead and apologize for chuckling when you said content warning grad school.
Yeah, no, it's funny, but also it is true. That, one of the reasons why I left academia, great, we're going into therapy podcast again, something about this trilogy, but is because I could feel it warping my values and turning me into somebody who, valued people by their ability to perform certain kinds of intelligence. And given that, I am a disabled person who feels that that is like a morally abhorrent viewpoint, I left. And so maybe that's part of why I, have this sort of negative reaction to the book is that this is somebody who completely buys into that system to the point that it chews her up and destroys her. And the book is selling this to us as a triumphant victory.
It is very, very Madoka in that specific thing. And like, it's also like, we even get the time loop of, I get to be with my girlfriend for one day over and over again.
Yes.
Which doesn't seem to be in the book for any other reason than to be a Madoka reference. And
to make you feel better about, the sacrifice that she's making.
This is the third time we've mentioned the anime Puella, Magi, Madoka, Magica. In completely different contexts every single time. Alexis thinks it's a metaphor for the grinding futility of activism. Also, Madoka sacrifices herself and becomes Jesus to protect every girl. Also, it's a story about how girls are inherently sinful and corrupt, and it's only the sacrifice of Madoka herself which allows them to be acceptable and to fulfill the insatiable desires of men, which are considered to be a universal constant in this context. It's a complicated mess of a document. Yeah, no, I was not happy with that.
No, me neither.
Not one little tiny bit. And yeah, no, and it's also like so telegraphed,
It is so telegraphed.
It's like when they start calling her savior in the second book, I'm like, oh no. And then
yes.
And then by the third book, I'm like, oh God, they weren't just the Planeteers, they were your apostles this whole fucking time.
I know. Yes. No, it's really frustrating. And also, so something else is frustrating because apparently we've decided to go straight to the grumpy zone is the
It's a
idea
sequel.
it's a sequel,
We can do
right? Carries as a false flag operation, which was both
Yes.
incredibly telegraphed. Like, that was obvious from the first book. But, like,
Yes.
again, this is a frustrating thing because, what it's supposed to be is, oh, the authorities are lying to you, and sure, but there's not actually been that many false flag operations,
I mean, this is sort of the problem with the whole premise of this book, which is that, what it's trying to say is that, oh, like, don't look to AI to be to solve our problems, because AI are programmed by humans, and so they're going to just be humans on on steroids, and they're going to take all of our evil, because this book really believes in good and evil, into themselves and amplify it, which is something that has been part of the tech discourse for decades now.
Right.
Algorithms can be racist and sexist because they were made by racist and sexist people, et cetera, et cetera. But it falls into the trap of making the authorities too competent as a result.
Yes.
Because the truth of the matter is that the reason that there aren't very many false flag operations in history, or particularly the ones that do happen tend to get found out almost immediately, is that conspiracies like this don't work because people can't keep their mouths shut. This level of granular control just doesn't exist. And it doesn't even exist when you are, when you have like the cultural equivalent of mind control.
Yeah.
And like, no matter how smart the AIs are, like, which is also something that really sort of ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
Depending on the needs of the plot, these are apparently quantum supercomputers who can essentially see the future, because that's what quantum means.
Well, actually, to be fair, I don't think they're actually supposed to be able to see the future. I think it's made clear that everybody has bought into the idea that they can see the future. And so thus does whatever they want, thus confirming that they can see the future. It is left ambiguous whether or not all of those little changes that people are making, to help Nemesis rise to power, are actually doing the thing.
Yes, that is true. That is true. It might have been flim flam from the start. But so either the book is putting this idea across in a kind of complicated way, but as representatives of the international Jewish conspiracy, it's important for us to tell you that there really aren't any international conspiracies on this level.
There really aren't. Yeah, and perhaps this is why I have, a knee-jerk reaction to having this false flag operation be like the big dramatic plot twist.
Yes. I mean, not only because it's not really a twist, but because
twist, right.
It's just really not. It's really not how things work,
Right, and because it's not how things work, it makes this a less effective commentary on empire, and on like a totalitarian state, because if this is supposed to be, at least to some degree, a critique of modern society, particularly American society. It doesn't work if it's doing, like, this is supposed to be a critique of modern America, but in a universe where everything that the evangelicals believe is actually true.
Yes.
Including the, government being responsible for false flag operations.
It really does feel like the kind of fanfic that comes out of a person who was an evangelical and is getting out of it, but still sees the world in the moral dimensions that growing up as an evangelical inculcated them with,
Yeah.
They're just on the other side of it now. Like, right. Okay, then hail Satan, I guess,
Right, exactly. Something that I did like about the third book was getting to see a little bit into the other alien, seeing that there's actually a bunch of other alien civilizations out there, and that humanity is the equivalent of North Korea.
Yes, that was fun. I liked it. It felt pretty cherry with an H.
It did,
The
yes.
excursion into the alien world, which I always like because I'm a huge C.J. Cherry fan.
I just bought a stack of cherry from the library book sale. I'm very pleased.
Yeah, just how much this is not a big deal to any of them felt really well observed to
Right.
the to the ad hoc alien UN there.
Right. There's sort of the ad hoc alien UN who's like, absolutely, we can't help you. Absolutely, we can't help you. So sorry. And then, they get pulled aside to be like, but unofficially, we can totally funnel some armaments.
Right,
If you're
exactly.
trying to, to
Here,
the small
let's give you a small amount of ships and some military advisors. How about we do that?
Right, exactly. It's so
That's how these things. That's the international conspiracy, by the
right,
way,
and
in case you're
incidentally,
wondering.
and so that was actually, I thought, really well done.
Yes.
Including the fact that, Tiv and was it Grid, which whoever the other interchangeable former grad student was, were, have no idea that this is what's going on. Like, it's real obvious, but because they're from the galactic equivalent of North Korea, they're just like, oh, somebody does want to help us.
These are the Vietnamese delegation that walked all the way to the Treaty of Versailles to plead their case.
Well, sort of. This is more the this is them. If then instead you fast forward and you're getting your green berets.
Yeah, just aligning a few decades there in between.
Yes. So that I enjoyed. That was well done.
Yes, there are things that I enjoyed about these two books. Actually, there is something that I enjoyed about the second book. Mm-hmm. My single favorite thing about the second book was Elu experiencing his 1950s housewife awakening.
Yes, that was actually kind of great.
That was really funny, and it felt. The relationship between Elu and Akavi felt pretty well drawn as an abusive relationship, maybe a little, cartoony, but
it was a little cartoony, but I mean, honestly, a lot of abusive relationships really are. So
yeah, and yeah, so I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed sort of, that is, you miss a couple of things by skipping the second book and missing Elu, the change in the way that Elu looks at Akavi.
In fact, that was why I was like, read the first few chapters and the last few chapters, because
right,
you really only need the one time when Akavi snaps and beats him up.
Indeed.
So
Another thing I liked, Lorelei, is that her name? The teleporting
Lumilai or whatever.
Lumley. She got kind of a personality, so that was nice.
Yes,
that
even if
marked her out among,
she was kind of just Enga's counterpart among the grad students, but
yes, and like
Lulelei.
she's like Lulelei, yeah, and all like I don't actually belong in this group because I never worked on the heretical magic. She's like the secret crypto neurotypical in the group, and the horrible power that they mistrust her for is her power of observing people, which is scary among the autistic. Which I thought was really funny, although I'm not sure if that was funny on purpose.
I just viewed her as a different kind of autistic who, studies people really carefully because she doesn't intuit their behavior.
Which is my kind of autistic, incidentally. And I know I shouldn't, but I really like Ev. One of the things about the second book, which I found frustrating, was the lack of Ev.
Okay, so here's the thing, is I do not like Ev as a person. And one of the things I liked about the third book is that it really does show much more starkly just how like awful and groomery and petty Ev can be. But as a character, she has a real charisma that was definitely lacking from the third book. Like from the second book, like she does make everything more interesting.
Indeed. I like, there are a lot of notes about her in the third book, which I really liked. I liked how, her, I thought it was a great touch that her finding out that there are aliens who work with outside is not like, oh, finally more people like me, because that's what I've been saying I lack, but oh, wait a minute, I'm less special now. Fuck,
right. And like getting super sulky about it.
Yeah,
She
again,
spends
I really relate to Ev in a number of different ways, which probably doesn't reflect well on me.
no,
But
it really doesn't. Don't give Isaac any kind of institutional power, guys. This should be your takeaway from this podcast.
actually, I'd be a really great dictator. I'd make everybody give the government all their property. Then I'd put all the rich people in prison. I can't see anything going wrong with this. Well, I mean, don't give Ysera any kind of institutional power either. Apparently,
Right.
But, maybe institutional power is the problem.
Maybe,
But
well, I will just note that like whenever Ev shows up among her graduate students, despite the fact that she treated them really horribly and is continuing to treat them really horribly, she still completely controls all of their social dynamics.
yes, indeed.
And and again, the way that she uses sort of a combination of flattery and pressure to convince Ysera to commit suicide, and then gets kind of pouty when when God Ysera loves Tiv more than her.
We some of us have I'll put it this way, some of us have an Evan side of us who we have to work to keep under control.
Yes, that's fair.
Yeah.
But she has a real sort of personality and just charisma, I guess, on the page that makes the sections that she's in much more interesting, even if she is personally very even if it is very frustrating to me as the reader sometimes to watch other people fall into her orbit again.
Agreed.
You do get some good Enga moments. The point where Enga is like, "We're on a battleship, you dumbass. Of course we can make a meaningful difference in this battle."
Yes.
And
Enga is also great throughout the book,
yes.
and I hope that she has an okay time in this new world.
Yeah, well, and so that was another thing is that yet another thing that like Elu does that we apparently are supposed to forgive him for is he and Akavi take away her communication device.
Yeah,
like these,
but, I mean, it's
so-called
it's
allies.
well observed. It's a well observed cruelty,
Yeah.
on Akavi's part.
And then eventually
again,
she gets her hands on a makeshift communication device and.
Yes, and she becomes the trumpeter swan. I suppose that there's probably a reason why the author chose not to, give us a how Akavi got this way bit.
Well, for one thing, Akavi wasn't actually her OC. He was somebody else's OC. He's a friend's OC that she borrowed for the book. It says so in the acknowledgments, which I assume aren't in the ebook.
Of course, they're not in the ebook. Audiobook. We mean audiobook.
Once again, the importance of paratextual materials.
So that's what she meant when she said that the book started with Akavi. Okay. Well, I guess that would be why he doesn't get a backstory. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that.
No.
I'm just gonna say that at all. Yeah.
But I think that I honestly think that that's part of why he stays in the narrative for so long. Like,
yes, I think his death was really funny.
His death was really funny, where she was just like, "No, I'm God now," and sort of shoves him aside.
Yeah, squishes him. And
then first she squishes him, and then his soul starts to invade her, and she's just like, "Oh no, wait! I don't have to put up with this anymore." Shoo.
Yes, it is. There is it's like if you do a little work, it's like you can get some good stuff out of the second and third books. Mm-hmm. Like, in the second book, productivity is still pedestalizing Ysera in a weird way.
Yes. She does the entire, and she really does in the third book too. And and you get to see Ship doing the same thing with her.
Yeah, I would have really preferred to have a reckoning on that, but at least there's some changes in that sort of dynamic. but and I mean, you can view sort of Ishira's ascension as a kind of like, final graduation to self-belief thing, but I don't think that's real
No,
in the way that
I
it's
did
portrayed
not.
here.
No, and again, it comes at the cost of self-immolation. So,
Yeah. Oh, it did occur to me that at least the way they're portrayed in the second book, the Gone people are kind of like the drummers from the Diamond
yes,
Age.
absolutely. Yes, I had the same thought.
Yeah, and I think that actually the drummers are slightly better handled, weirdly.
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's been a while
but
since you've read
I
the
mean,
Diamond Age.
that's a race to the bottom,
Yeah,
right there. But
Diamond Age,
uh,
it was real bad. Um,
The Diamond Age was my favorite book when I was in college. And then I met Alexis and they told me I was wrong. Infuriatingly, turns out that they were correct about that. It hasn't held up very well. But anytime you disagree with my opinions, think of the specific take on the Diamond Age that you disagree with, and remember that I held it for a long time. But yeah, no, the sort of the idea, it does show that this sort of idea of to sort of go back to more broad wizards versus lesbians concepts, like the an idea that keeps coming up in all of these books and has been coming up in science fiction since we were kids is collectivism, right?
Yes.
The mind meld, hive mind goo,
yes, no,
Innovative
absolutely.
scenario, and how it might be one way out of this. And that's kind of what happens to Ysera also, except that because this is a Christian worldview, she can't actually be sort of the all consciousness. She has to be a singular god, which wipes out the previous polytheistic pantheon.
Yeah.
And becomes Tentacle Jesus. It's very depressing.
It is, because, it is definitely a letdown from the first book, which is really excellent.
We should talk about the ways in which this book reflects on the first one. I think the major thing is that it makes me less forgiving of the first book's pacing.
Yeah.
Because the second book's pacing is so god awful.
Yeah.
That it's like, it sort of reveals how much of the first book is spent treading water.
Yes, it does. I did feel like it gave me confidence that the portrayal of Ev as, being genuinely abusive was in fact accurate, because they really play that up in the third book.
Yeah, that was intentional.
Yeah.
But I believed that,
Yeah.
in the first book as well. But yeah, I was, after reading these books, I was like, was I did I sort of get gold into enthusiasm about the first book, as I often do? But I'd have to reread it, but looking back on it, no, I think the first book is genuinely very good.
Yes, but it works better as a standalone. And the thing is that the first book would be better if it cut out a lot of the things that show up even worse in the second and third book. Like, all the torture scenes, work okay in the context of the first book, but when you know that this is leading up to a Jesus narrative, they become a lot less tolerable.
This is true. And when you can dismiss the soul stuff as being maybe an invention, the book works better,
Yeah.
know. When that's actually real, that's much less
Yeah. So speaking of which,
much less tolerable.
what did you think about the time skips?
Yeah, I was going to go to that next myself. Well, I think that, this book is it definitely, sort of reified that the original sin of this world is toxic mentor-student relationships
There is that.
with gay overtones, with weird erotic overtones, because that keeps happening between Ysera and Ev, between Akavi and Elu, and between
General,
what's her face
General,
and General
Walters and Giselle.
Yeah, who, I think that it's like I don't think we needed it.
No. So personally, I thought the first two were actually, they didn't quite fit in with the rest of the book, but they were, there was this interesting little vignette about, this woman failing to deal with the loss of her wife.
Yes.
But then as they kept going on, they kept hammering all the themes that I didn't like about the book. Like, the problem here is organized religion. We have to replace this with a different organized religion that isn't homophobic, because this time Jesus will be a lesbian.
Yeah, no, it's like, for a book where most of the really evil characters are women, or at least, female presenting most of the time, it still manages to fall into the queer desires, the revolutionary, etc., except that it's pretty much I don't think it's because Jesus is a lesbian. I think it's because Jesus is autistic that things are going to be better this time.
Sort of, but the lesbian part is actually meaningful because you get all these time skips where, Giselle is an ex-evangelical, and, so why she has all these qualms about Nemesis setting itself up to be a religion are specifically because her, and we only get this from her perspective, but from her, thus the only religions that we ever get to hear about on Earth are through the perspective of an ex-evangelical, and thus all religion is, evangelical Christianity and extremely homophobic and believes in, a fiery hell.
Right, exactly, which is then sort of programmed into Nemesis, although, by the time that her soul is joined with Nemesis, Nemesis is already like mostly General Walters, which doesn't make any sense with the mechanisms that we've laid out, but just go with it.
Right. Also, the fact that General Walters needed to goad Giselle into killing her doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it's the same kind of weird, like overcomplicated, manipulative Xanatos stuff that Akavi has been doing for all three books.
That's true, and for that matter, kind of what Ev is doing to Ysera. So I guess it does actually work thematically, even if it's bizarre.
Yeah, again, it's not really how things work, but it's fun to imagine that that's how they work, I guess.
Yes. Also, the idea that, the only thing that will cause humanity to save itself is believing in a false religion. Like, I mean,
it's certainly an idea that gets bandied about a lot.
It does. And I mean, I don't think it's true, but also it's such a dim, I feel like the first book took a much more positive view of humanity.
Yeah.
That like
yeah, I'd say
everybody, that like everybody is human, and it's the things that make us make us less human, and that force us to dehumanize others that are, what's bad and wrong about society, which, is sort of fundamental to critiquing ableism. And then, but in the third book, it's different. It's, saying that actually humans need to be babied and guided, and that, if they can't believe that there's an all-powerful force telling them what to do, they'll just destroy everything.
Humanity likes to bend at the knees, but don't worry, put your mind at ease. There are those of us who can't stand authorities, and we're very hard to employ. Yeah, and that's reflected with the speed with which cults rise up around the supercomputers.
Right.
Which I don't see happening. There's a sort of a through line in this book, which is a fear of the mob, like a fear of the unwashed, which is partly why the second book feels so morally conflicted, because it doesn't really like being down among the people, and probably kind of thinks Ev has a point, yeah, and the and sort of the upshot is that we get a sort of Hobbesian view of humanity, which I don't think is necessarily one that is borne out
I certainly
by.
hope not.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but
The yeah, I don't know. I mean, also the idea that like you could get all of these countries to each collaborate on each of them have their own special supercomputer, and I mean, it is actually kind of funny that okay, every country gets their special supercomputer. One of the supercomputers is the supercomputer of horror of like the prison industrial complex, and that's America. But like, which superpower's computer is the god of love and happiness?
it's an excellent question. Probably the French. Yeah, and it's like if you, I don't know, maybe CERN supercomputer.
It does have the certain supercomputer is the only one that has its own girl group. So
Did you know that CERN had its own girl group called Les Horribles Cernet? Their single was called Collider. You can look it up on YouTube. If somebody tells you they're ending the world there, show them that video. I think it's one of those things where it's like, if you look at the way that these things tend to work, it's probably not just, the military. It's probably a bunch of universities and research labs all over the place are doing this.
It is said that it's made it clear that some of these are states and some of these are NGOs and some of these are like Silicon Valley billionaire pet projects.
Yeah. But there was only 8 of them.
Right.
Or 7 of them, or whatever the number is. Yeah. And America is in charge. A thing that this book made me want to read more stories by non-Americans. And by non-Christian, if like not just non-Christians, but people who are not reacting against a Christian worldview.
Yes.
I'd like to read some East Asian wizards versus lesbians from a Buddhist perspective,
Well, we've got a very Jewish one on the lineup. So, well, actually, we'll see how the Water Outlaws turns out. Though I will note you can, talking from an East Asian perspective, there's plenty of hells in East Asian religions. There's an entire hell bureaucracy.
Yeah, but
with magistrates.
I like that. That's a different idea,
Yes, it is.
Despite Dante's attempt to create one for us.
Well, we could. Maybe you know what? We'll add the Terracotta Bride to our next short fiction roundup. It's by Zen Show.
Cool.
It absolutely fits. Cool.
All right. Well, I'll take it.
All right.
Speaking of what's coming next. What's coming next? Actually, we're doing the Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry next week. Short stories after that. No, actually, we switched it again. We're doing short stories next week. All right. Until then, thank you for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.